The Grand Synod of the Othrian did not tolerate silence, yet silence was the only currency the galaxy had offered them for 10,000 cycles. The chamber itself was an architectural marvel of crystallized acoustics and shifting gravity, designed to amplify the whispers of the powerful and drown out the pleas of the weak. Here, in the heart of the galactic core, the elder races gathered not to govern, but to observe the slow, entropic decay of the outer rim with a detached, scholarly fascination. The air was thick, smelling of ozone and the sterile, recycled breath of 1,000 different species, each distinct in their biology but identical in their apathy. High Counselor Verk, a being of towering height with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that held the swirling nebulae of his homeworld, looked down from his suspended dais. He was ancient, his life span measured in the birth and death of stars, and he had seen enough civilizations rise and fall to view extinction as a mere statistical inevitability, a variable to be entered into the grand equation of existence. Before him, hovering on a repulsor platform that trembled with the vibrations of her own terror, stood Alara of the Kylan. She was small, fragile, her avian features ruffled and unkempt, a stark contrast to the sleek, robed majesty of the counselors surrounding her. She was the voice of a dying world, a scream caught in a vacuum, and Verk found her desperation distasteful. It disrupted the symmetry of the proceedings. Alara's voice cracked as she spoke, the translator collar around her throat struggling to convey the raw, bleeding anguish of her native tongue into the sterile high court syntax of the Synod. She spoke of the hollow tides, the scourge that had emerged from the dark space between the spiral arms. It was not a fleet, not an empire, but a force of consuming hunger, a biomechanical swarm that descended upon worlds and stripped them of biological matter, leaving behind only dead rock and silence. The Kylan had fought. They had thrown their entire defensive grid against the tide, burned their orbital shipyards to create debris fields, and sacrificed their moons to slow the advance. It had bought them days, perhaps hours. Now the capital world was besieged, the sky turned black by the swarm, the oceans boiling away under the heat of 1 billion entry vectors. Alara begged not for victory, for she knew that was impossible, but for extraction. She pleaded for the great fleets of the Synod to jump in, to open a corridor, to save the genetic heritage of her people before the final silence claimed them. Her plea hung in the vast, crystalline air of the chamber, reverberating off the walls, asking for compassion from beings who had long ago traded their hearts for logic. Verk shifted his weight, the sound of his heavy robes rustling like dry leaves in a dead forest. He looked to his left, where the representative of the Xylot ascendancy floated in a tank of nutrient fluid, bubbling with disapproval. He looked to his right, where the geometric, silicon-based entity of the Hexarchy processed the data with cold, mathematical precision. The consensus was already forming, visible in the subtle shifts of posture and the dimming of bioluminescent displays. Intervention was costly. Intervention was dangerous. The hollow tides were considered a great filter event, a natural predator of the galaxy that pruned the weak to ensure the strong survived. To interfere was to invite the predator's attention toward the core. To save the Kylan was to risk the Synod. The logic was flawless, circular, and utterly devoid of morality. Verk cleared his throat, a sound like grinding stones, and the chamber fell into a deeper, heavier silence. He began to speak, his voice amplified by the crystalline structures, booming down upon the small, trembling figure of Alara. He spoke of treaties that forbade interference in natural evolutionary pressures. He spoke of the resources required to mobilize the stagnant fleets of the core. He spoke of the greater good, a concept that always seemed to require the sacrifice of the lesser races. The refusal was not delivered with malice. That would have been easier to bear. Malice implies passion, and passion implies recognition. This was indifference. It was the indifference of a mountain to an ant. Alara listened, her large, dark eyes filling with tears that were not merely biological reactions, but the physical manifestation of a broken soul. She had sent the distress signal to every known frequency, to every civilized beacon within 10,000 light-years. She had called out to the ancient empires, the wise scholars, the technological gods of the galaxy. And the gods sat before her, debating the caloric cost of fuel versus the value of a species' existence. The Xylot representative bubbled a query regarding the Kylan's artistic output, wondering if their sculptures could be preserved even if the people could not, as if her culture were already an artifact to be catalogued in a museum. The Hexarchy entity calculated the precise time of extinction, updating the countdown on a holographic display for all to see, a ticking clock of genocide. Alara realized then that the Synod did not see a tragedy. They saw a sunset. Beautiful, perhaps, but inevitable and ending in darkness. It was in this suffocating atmosphere of polite refusal that the interruption occurred. It did not come as a thunderclap, nor as a grand entrance. It began as an anomaly on the sensory grid of the chamber's perimeter. A low-frequency thrum, a vibration that was felt in the bones rather than heard with the ears. The counselors shifted, annoyed by the disturbance. Verk frowned, tapping a command into his console to silence the error, but the vibration grew. It was a resonance, a deep, harmonic frequency that seemed to bypass the shielding of the chamber. Then the communications officer, a multi-limbed creature of nervous energy, let out a sound of genuine shock. The main holographic sphere in the center of the room, which had been displaying the doomed Kylan homeworld, flickered. The image of the burning planet remained, but superimposed over it was a signal. It was not a standard diplomatic packet. It was not formatted in the elegant, encrypted codes of the Synod. It was raw, analog, powerful, and incredibly noisy. It tore through the sophisticated filters of the Council's network like a sledgehammer through glass. The signal resolved into audio first, a chaotic mix of static, telemetry data, and a voice. The voice was harsh, guttural, speaking a language that the universal translators struggled to parse, spitting out phonemes that sounded like stones breaking. It was a language of friction and impact. Then the video feed stabilized. It showed the bridge of a ship, but this was not the clean, glowing, ethereal bridge of a Synod vessel. It was a cavern of gray metal, exposed piping, and dark screens. The lighting was dim, red combat lighting that cast long, sharp shadows. Figures moved in the background, bipedal, encased in bulky, pressurized suits that looked more like industrial machinery than armor. They did not glide, they stomped. They did not telepathically commune, they shouted orders over the roar of engines. In the center of the frame sat a figure, strapped into a command chair that looked scuffed and worn. The figure was unmasked, revealing soft, pale skin, a patch of fur on the top of the head, and two forward-facing eyes that burned with a predatory intensity. A human. Verk felt a ripple of distaste. Humans. The galaxy knew of them, of course. They were the upstarts from the Orion Arm, a species that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel before they began colonizing the most hostile, resource-poor rocks in their sector. They were known for their volatility, their obsession with kinetic weaponry, and their refusal to integrate into the refined hierarchy of the Synod. They were considered children, loud, dirty, and prone to breaking things. They had not been invited to the Synod. They had no seat here, yet here they were hijacking a council frequency. The human on the screen leaned forward, peering into the camera lens as if he could see the counselors across the vastness of space. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and a scar ran down his jawline. He did not bow. He did not offer the traditional greeting of the star tides. He simply spoke, his voice modulated by the translator into a flat, uncompromising tone. "This is Admiral Cole of the United Terran Coalition Heavy Cruiser Aegis. We intercepted a distress beacon on an open frequency. Identification, Kylan Republic. Status, critical. We are responding." A murmur of confusion rippled through the Synod. Responding. The humans were weeks away at standard drift. Their ships were primitive, reliant on reaction drives and crude warp bubbles that tore at the fabric of space rather than gliding through it. What could they possibly do? The Kylan system was already lost. The Hexarchy had calculated it. The Void Weavers, the Swarm, were infinite. A single human cruiser or even a fleet of their rusting hulks would be vaporized in moments. The Xylot representative bubbled a laugh, a wet, derisive sound. "The primates are coming to watch the fire," the translator intoned. "How quaint, they believe they can hunt the storm." Verk raised a hand for silence, intrigued despite himself. "Admiral," Verk said, his voice projected back to the human ship. "This is High Counselor Verk. You are entering a quarantine zone. The Kylan system is under a Class 4 extinction event. Intervention is prohibited by the Galactic Concordat to prevent the spread of the biologic entity. You are ordered to stand down and observe only." The human admiral did not blink. He did not look at Verk or acknowledge the authority of the Synod. He looked down at a console, flipping a physical switch, a mechani. Toggle, archaic and satisfyingly tactile. "High Counselor," Cole said, and the way he said the title made it sound like an insult. "We aren't signatories to your Concordat, and we didn't ask for permission. We asked for target coordinates, but since you're busy talking, we'll find them ourselves." The transmission cut. The screen went black, then returned to the view of the Kylan system. The silence in the chamber was different now. It was no longer the silence of apathy. It was the silence of insult. The audacity, the sheer, blinding stupidity of these creatures. To fly into the maw of the hollow tides was suicide. But as Verk watched the holographic display, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Sensors on the periphery of the Kylan system registered a rupture. Not a gentle slide into real space, but a violent tear. Space itself seemed to bruise and bleed as the human fleet arrived, and it was a fleet. The Synod had expected a few scout ships, perhaps a diplomatic envoy coming to offer platitudes. What emerged from the warp tier was a wall of iron. There were no graceful curves, no bioluminescent hulls. These ships were bricks. Massive rectangular slabs of armor plating, bristling with antenna and gun batteries. They were ugly. They were brutal. They were built not to navigate the cosmos, but to beat it into submission. There were hundreds of them, a formation so tight and so heavy that the gravitational displacement triggered tsunami warnings on the Kylan homeworld below. They did not stop to scan. They did not hail the planet. They simply placed themselves between the swarm and the dying world. The atmosphere in the Synod chamber shifted from annoyance to bewilderment. The scale of the human deployment was irrational. The energy output required to move that much mass was astronomical. Why waste it on a species they had no trade agreements with? The Kylan had nothing the humans needed. No rare elements, no strategic position. It was a waste of resources that defied all economic logic. Alara, still hovering on her platform, watched with wide eyes, her beak slightly open. She had never seen a human before. She had heard stories of them as barbarians, as dangerous primitives who hammered atoms together to make fire. But as she watched the sensor readings, she saw the barbarians form a protective shell around her world. The hollow tides, sensing fresh biomass, turned their attention from the planet to the new arrivals. The swarm was a living cloud, millions of distinct biological entities that moved as a fluid, blotting out the stars. It crashed against the human fleet like a wave against a cliff. The Synod expected the human ships to buckle. The hollow tides used acidic secretions and plasma borers that could dissolve standard energetic shielding in seconds. But the humans did not use standard shielding. They used matter, layers and layers of dense ablative armor. The first wave of the swarm smashed into the human hulls and simply broke. The human ships shuddered but held. Then the response came. It was not the elegant, focused beams of the elder races. It was a storm of kinetics. The entire flank of the human formation lit up with muzzle flashes. Thousands of railguns fired in unison, accelerating slugs of tungsten and depleted uranium to a fraction of the speed of light. There was no sound in space, but the visual was deafening. The front line of the hollow tides evaporated. It was turned into a mist of biological slurry. The humans were not using precision, they were using saturation. They filled the void with so much metal that it became solid. Barbaric, the Hexarchy representative stated, though the logic processors in its voice seemed to lag. The expenditure of ammunition is unsustainable. They will deplete their magazines in minutes at this rate of fire. Indeed, it seemed impossible. The swarm was endless. For every creature the humans destroyed, 10 more took its place. The sheer mass of the hollow tides began to wrap around the human fleet, engulfing it. The view on the holographic screen became a chaotic swirl of gray metal and black ichor. Verk watched, waiting for the inevitable collapse. No species could withstand that kind of attrition. The humans were trapped. They had flown into a tomb. "They have doomed themselves," Verk murmured. "A foolish gesture. Now the swarm will consume them, and with their biomass added, it will grow stronger." But the humans did not die. Inside the swirling cloud of the enemy, the human formation shifted. The massive brick-like ships began to rotate, interlocking with one another. Magnetic clamps engaged. Airlocks sealed against airlocks. In a maneuver that defied all naval doctrine, the human fleet physically connected, forming a solid, continuous ring of steel around the equator of the planet. They became a shield world, and then they vented their reactors. It was not a weapon the Synod had ever seen, because no sane species would Aponize their own life support systems. The human ships vented superheated plasma and radiation directly from their drive cores outward, creating a corona of fire that burned at the temperature of a small star. The hollow tides that touched it didn't just die, they incinerated. The Aegis, the ship commanded by Admiral Cole, sat at the center of the formation, coordinating the burn. On the screen in the Synod chamber, the transmission from the human fleet returned. Admiral Cole was still there, sweat dripping down his face, the red lights of the bridge flashing urgently. He was shouting orders to his crew, his voice calm but rapid fire. "Stabilize the grid, route auxiliary power to the structural integrity fields. If a hull breach occurs, seal the section and vent it. Do not let them through. Do not let them touch the planet." He turned back to the camera, his eyes locking with Verk S across the light years. "You watching, counselor?" Cole growled. "You seeing this? This is how we hold the line. We don't calculate the odds, we change them." The battle raged for hours. In the Synod chamber, the counselors stopped debating. They stopped checking their portfolios. They simply watched. They watched as the humans bled. Ships exploded, their hulls finally failing under the relentless pressure of the swarm. But when a human ship died, it did not retreat. It detonated. The crews rigged their reactors to overload, turning their vessels into antimatter bombs that took out huge swathes of the enemy. It was a display of martyrdom that terrified the elder races. The concept of self-sacrifice was known to them, of course, but usually as a tragic necessity, a last resort. For these humans, it seemed to be a tactical doctrine. They spent their lives like currency to buy time for the Kylan transport ships to launch. And launch they did. From the surface of the burning world, thousands of Kylan refugee vessels lifted off, protected by the umbrella of the human blockade. The tiny, fragile ships threaded the needle, passing through the gaps in the human formation. As each refugee ship passed a human cruiser, the human vessel would pivot, taking the hits intended for the fleeing civilians. Alara wept openly now, her hands pressed against the glass of her pod. She saw a human frigate, its name emblazoned on the hull, UNS Thermopylae, deliberately ram a massive Voidweaver Leviathan that was about to strike a hospital ship. The frigate crumpled, its crew instantly vaporized, but the hospital ship escaped. "Why?" Alara whispered. "Why do they do this?" It was a question that hung in the minds of every being in the chamber. Why? What did they gain? The humans were losing a significant portion of their navy. They were losing thousands of their people, for strangers, for a species that had nothing to offer them. It defied the logic of the survival of the fittest. It defied the cynical politics of the galaxy. As the last of the Kylan transports cleared the gravity well and jumped to safety, the human fleet began to withdraw. But they did not rout. They backed away slowly, maintaining their wall of fire, covering the retreat until the very end. The swarm, frustrated and burned, lashed out, but the humans were already spinning up their warp drives. The tier in space reopened, and the battered, scorched remnants of the Terran fleet vanished into the void, leaving behind a debris field of dead biomatter and shattered steel. The Kylan system was dead, the planet stripped, but the Kylan people lived. The silence in the Synod chamber was absolute. It was not the comfortable silence of before. It was a stunned, heavy silence. The hologram faded. Verk sat on his dais, feeling a sensation he had not felt in centuries, shame. It was a cold, creeping feeling that started in his gut and worked its way up. He looked at the other counselors. The Xylot was silent, its bubbles still. The Hexarchy entity was running simulations, trying to find the mathematical error that explained the human behavior, and failing. They had been shown up. They, the masters of the galaxy, the hoarders of wisdom, had sat and watched while the children did the work of gods. Days later, the humans came to the Synod. They did not ask for an audience. They arrived in a single ship, the Aegis bearing the scars of the battle. It docked at the orbital ring of the Synod station, dwarfing the delicate diplomatic yachts of the other delegates. Admiral Cole walked into the chamber, flanked by 2 soldiers in power armor and a Kylan. It was Alara. She had gone to them. She walked beside the human admiral, her head held high, no longer trembling. Cole did not wear ceremonial robes. He wore his service dress uniform, gray and austere, with a simple row of ribbons on his chest. He walked to the center of the room, standing where Alara had stood when she begged for help. Verk looked down at him. "Admiral Cole," Verk said, his voice lacking its usual thunder, "you have violated the Concordat. You have risked the stability of the core. You have provoked a natural force." Cole looked around the room, his gaze lingering on each counselor. "We didn't come here to apologize," Cole said quietly. The acoustics of the room carried his voice to every corner. "And we didn't come to join your club. We came to deliver a message." He gestured to Alara. Alara stepped forward. She looked different, stronger. "The humans have offered us a new home," she said, her voice clear. "In their territory, they have given us a world, terraforming equipment, protection. They ask for nothing in return." "Nothing," the Xylot representative sputtered. "That is impossible. No species is so altruistic. There is a cost. There is always a cost." Cole smiled, but it was a cold, sad smile. "There is a cost," he said. "We paid it in the void. We paid it in blood." He took a step forward. "You want to know why you're all sitting there, calculating the odds, wondering what our angle is? You think we're stupid. You think we're reckless." He paused, looking down at his hands. We are reckless, we are violent, we know that. We almost killed ourselves a dozen times before we even left our own gravity well. We know what extinction looks like. We looked it in the eye. He looked up, his eyes burning. We have a history, counselor, a history of standing by while bad things happened, a history of looking away, and we made a promise to ourselves, written in the DNA of every human born since the Great Wars, never again. When we hear a scream in the dark, we don't check the treaty. We don't check the bank account. We answer, because if we don't, who will? You, he scoffed. You sat here and watched a genocide like it was a weather report. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. But that's not the only reason we're here, Cole continued, his tone shifting, becoming more analytical. We didn't just fight the hollow tides, we scanned them. We boarded one of the Leviathans before we detonated it. He pulled a data crystal from his pocket, a rough-hewn, diamond-shaped storage device, and tossed it onto the floor of the chamber. It clattered loudly. We found something interesting inside the biological matrix of the swarm, coding, artificial coding. The Hexarchy representative's lights flashed rapidly. Impossible. The hollow tides are a natural entropic phenomenon. Are they? Cole asked. Because that coding, it matches the syntax of the Synod's own archives, the archives you keep locked away, the archives from the founding era. A gasp went through the room. Verk felt his heart stop. The founding era, the time of myths, the time before the peace. We analyzed the signal, Cole said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The hollow tides aren't a predator, they're a weapon. A biological weapon created millions of years ago, probably to wipe out a rival empire. And then, abandoned, forgotten, left to drift and mutate and hunger. You didn't refuse to help the Kylan because of a treaty. You refused because you were afraid the galaxy would find out that the monsters eating our children were made by your ancestors. The truth hit the chamber like a physical blow. It explained everything. The apathy, the paralysis, the fear. The elder races weren't wise, they were guilty. They were hiding their sins behind a veil of bureaucracy. Cole looked at Verk with pity. We're not going to expose you, he said. Not yet, because right now that weapon is still out there, and it's waking up. The swarm that hit the Kylan system, that was just a scout. The main body is moving, and it's heading for the core. Panic erupted in the chamber. Voices shouted over one another. The carefully cultivated order of the Synod collapsed in an instant. Silence, Verk roared, but his authority was shattered. He looked at the human. If what you say is true, if it is coming here, we are defenseless, our fleets are ceremonial, we have forgotten how to fight. We know, Cole said. That's why we're here. We aren't here to conquer you, we aren't here to judge you, we're here to lead you. He signaled to his officers, and a holographic map appeared above them. It showed the galaxy and a massive red stain moving toward the center. Then blue lights began to appear around the red stain. Human fleets, but not just human. There were other lights now. Kylan ships, and others, smaller species, the outcasts, the ignored, the ones the Synod had deemed irrelevant. They were rallying. The United Terran Coalition is activating Article 5 of our own charter, Cole announced. Defense of the sentient. We are forming a grand army, not of the Synod, but of the living. We are sharing our shield technology. We are sharing our kinetic drivers. We are teaching the Kylan how to build railguns. We are teaching the Xylot how to harden their hulls. Cole leaned in. You have two choices, High Counselor. You can sit here in your crystal tower and wait to be eaten by the sins of your fathers, or you can come down into the mud with us. You can open your archives, give us the codes to shut down the swarm. Give us your resources, give us your ships, and we will retrofit them. Verk looked at the map. He looked at the red tide. He looked at the small, defiant blue lights of the humans. He realized that the galaxy had changed. The era of the Elders was over. The era of the Guardians had begun. The humans are underestimated, Verk whispered to himself, realizing the profound truth of it. We thought them children playing with fire, but they are not children, they are the firemen. He looked at Cole, and for the first time in 10,000 years, Verk bowed. It was a stiff, awkward movement, but it was sincere. The Synod accepts your proposal, Admiral. We will open the archives. We will mobilize the reserves. Cole nodded, his expression remaining grim. Good, because we don't have much time. As the Synod dissolved into a frenzy of activity, orders being shouted, fleets being activated, treaties being shredded, Alara stood by Cole's side. You frightened them, she said softly. Fear is a good motivator, Cole replied, watching the chaos he had unleashed. But hope is better. Do you really think we can win? She asked. The swarm is infinite. Cole looked at her, and a strange look crossed his face. A look of ancient, weary determination. Let me tell you something about humans, Alara. We don't fight because we think we're going to win. We fight because the alternative is unacceptable. We fight because we are stubborn. And sometimes the universe blinks first. He turned to walk back to his ship, the Aegis, ready to lead a galaxy that had despised him only hours ago. "Come on," he said. "We have a war to win, and after that, we have a lot of cleaning up to do." The camera pulled back through the crystalline roof of the Synod up into the blackness of space. It showed the human fleet, now joined by the ragtag vessels of a dozen other worlds, hanging in the void like a lantern in a dark forest. And beyond them, the shadow of the hollow tides loomed, massive and hungry. But for the first time in history, the shadow did not advance unchecked. It paused. It hesitated. Because standing in its path was a species that did not know how to kneel. The twist, however, was not just in the origin of the enemy. As the human fleet prepared for the next jump, deep within the Aegis, in a secure lab, a team of human scientists and Kylan mystics were working on the data Crystal Cole had thrown. They weren't just decoding a shutdown sequence. They were decoding a message embedded within the biological structure of the Void Weavers. "Admiral," the chief scientist radioed Cole as he sat in his command chair. "You need to see this, the coding. It's not just a weapon, it's a carrier wave." "Explain," Cole said. "The Void Weavers, they aren't just eating matter, they're harvesting it, they're storing it, every civilization they've consumed. The data is still there in a biological cloud storage. They aren't erasing history, they're archiving it." The scientist's voice trembled. "And there's a directive at the core of the program. It says, preserve against the coming night." Cole froze. Preserve against what? "That's just it, sir. The Void Weavers were built by the Founders not to kill us, but to save us. To break us down into data and DNA and store us safely because something else is coming. Something worse. The Void Weavers are a lifeboat, a horrific, destructive lifeboat." Cole looked out at the stars. The great filter wasn't the swarm was the shelter. "Then what are they hiding us from?" Cole whispered. The sensors screamed. A new signal appeared at the very edge of the galaxy. It was not biological, it was not mechanical. It was an absence, a void within the void. A darkness that drank the light of stars not to store them, but to erase them. The real enemy had arrived. Cole keyed the fleet-wide comms. "All ships, this is the Admiral, change of plans. We aren't just fighting for the Kylan anymore, and we aren't just fighting the swarm." He paused, the weight of the revelation settling on his shoulders. "We have to wake the galaxy up. The long night is here, and we are the only ones with a torch." The engines of the human fleet flared, burning blue and white against the dark. They didn't run from the new threat. They turned toward it. Because that is what humans do. When the dark comes, they do not hide, they burn. The narrative did not end there. It merely expanded, sprawling into the intricacies of this new, terrifying reality. The revelation that the Void Weavers, the hollow tides, were a perverse preservation mechanism shattered the political landscape of the galaxy more effectively than any weapon. The Synod, already reeling from the exposure of their ancestors' hubris, now faced a crisis of faith. Their entire history, our understanding of the natural order, was a lie. The Founders had not ascended, they had panicked. They had built a biological ark to harvest the galaxy's life forms because they foresaw a cataclysm they could not stop. And now that cataclysm was knocking on the door. Act 2 began not with battles, but with the painful, grinding friction of two incompatible philosophies trying to mesh. The humans, pragmatic and driven by the urgency of the threat, found themselves the de facto leaders of a coalition of the terrified. The elder races, paralyzed by the scale of the deception, looked to the children of Terra for guidance. It was a reversal of roles that bred resentment and confusion. On the Kylan colony world, now named Sanctuary, human engineers worked side by side with Xylot bioshapers and hexarchy logic priests. The atmosphere was tense. The humans worked fast, cutting corners, improvising, using duct tape and prayers to keep generators running. The aliens sought perfection, protocols, and consensus. Ambassador Thorne, a woman of steel-gray hair and iron patience, managed the diplomatic front on Sanctuary. She sat in a prefabricated command hut, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and alien spices. Across from her sat the high prelate of the Xylot. The Xylot were disgusted by the human tendency to hack biology. They viewed the Void Weavers as abominations to be destroyed. The humans viewed them as a resource to be repurposed. "You cannot mean to control them," the prelate bubbled, his translation collar vibrating with indignation. They are consumers of worlds. To harness them is to invite madness. Thorn leaned back, tapping a stylus against her datapad. We harness the atom prelate. We harness the plague. We harness the gravity of black holes. We don't look at a monster and see a monster. We see an engine. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the terraforming towers rising in the distance. The scientist, Dr. Aris, believes he can invert the signal. If the Void Weavers are gathering data to save us, we can tell them the danger is already here. We can tell them that the best way to save us is to fight for us. That is playing God, the prelate hissed. No, Thorn said, turning back with a sharp look. Your ancestors played God when they built them. We're just the janitors cleaning up the mess. The integration of human technology with alien tech was the next hurdle. The reveal came slowly through the agonizing process of trial and error. The humans introduced the concept of modular war. The Synod fleets were built as singular, perfect works of art. If a main drive failed, the ship was crippled. Human ships were built like Legos. If a drive failed, they bolted on a new one. If a gun jammed, they threw it away and welded a new one in place. They taught the Kylan how to armor their agricultural barges with debris plating. They taught the Hexarchy that intuition was not a glitch, but a data processing shortcut. The climax of this middle act occurred in the deep void near the remnant star. The true enemy, dubbed the Entropy Stalkers, made their first major incursions. These were not biological swarms. They were geometric fissures in reality, entities of anti-energy that didn't just consume matter, they unmade it. They deleted physics. A Hexarchy patrol fleet was erased, simply ceased to exist, their logs cutting off mid-sentence. Admiral Cole, now commanding a joint task force, realized that conventional weapons were useless. You couldn't shoot a hole in reality. You had to patch it. This led to the deployment of the Aegis Array. It was a strategy that required the humans to do what they did best, endure the unendurable. Plan was insane. The humans proposed using the captured Void Weavers, the very monsters that had eaten the Kylan homeworld, as shields. They would lure the Entropy Stalkers into a nebula, surround them with the biological mass of the Void Weavers, and then detonate the nebula using a human invention, the Singularity Spike. It was a weapon banned by every treaty in the galaxy, including the humans' own. It collapsed a localized area of space into a micro-black hole for a fraction of a second. The council debates were furious. Verk, now a shadow of his former self, argued for the plan. We have no other choice, he told the Synod. The humans offer a solution. It is ugly, it is dangerous, it is human, but it is a solution. The operation was launched. The scale was cinematic in the extreme. The nebula, a swirling cloud of purple and gold gas, became the stage. The human fleet, looking like a collection of scrap metal and grit, flew into the center, towing the dormant Void Weaver Leviathans. They broadcast the food signal, luring the Entropy Stalkers in. The Stalkers arrived, silent, jagged tears in the visual spectrum, bleeding darkness. The battle that ensued was silent and terrifying. The Stalkers lashed out, erasing human frigate. From existence. There were no explosions, just sudden absences. One moment a ship was there, the next, empty space. The psychological toll on the crews was immense. To see your wingman simply, delete. Hold the line, Cole's voice was the anchor. Wait for the density critical mass, wait for it. The humans took the punishment. They rammed their ships into the Stalkers to force them into position, using their own mass as physical blockades. The UNS Indomitable, a dreadnought, drove itself directly into a fissure, its hull screaming as reality peeled away, just to buy the Aegis time to align the spike. Now, Cole ordered. The Singularity Spike was fired. It wasn't a beam, it was a distortions wave. The center of the nebula collapsed, the gravity well spiked to infinity. The Void Weavers were crushed, their biological matter compressed into a singularity. The Entropy Stalkers, caught in the gravity trap, were pulled in. For a moment, a hole was punched in the universe, and then, with a flash of hawking radiation that outshone the galaxy, it evaporated. Silence returned to the nebula. The Stalkers were gone. The human fleet was decimated, reduced to drifting hulks. But they had won. They had proven that the inevitable could be stopped. The aftermath of the battle changed everything. The humans were no longer just allies, they were the saviors, but they were also feared. They had used a weapon that tore space. They had shown a willingness to break the fundamental laws of physics to win. Act 3 moved into the realm of the philosophical and the cosmic. The alliance was solidified, but the power dynamic had shifted permanently. The Synod was dissolved, replaced by the Terran Concordat. But the humans, true to their nature, did not rule as tyrants. They ruled as exhausted guardians. They didn't want the throne, they just wanted to make sure no one else sat on it and pressed the delete button. The final twist, the one that bridged the gap between the HFY trope and true sci-fi greatness, came from the interaction with the saved data inside the Void Weavers. Before they were destroyed, the humans had downloaded the archives. Alara and Thorn stood in a data cathedral on Earth. The room was filled with the ghosts of 1,000,000 extinct species, holographic projections reconstructed from the Void Weaver DNA banks. It was a library of the dead. "We found something," Alara said, her voice filled with awe. "In the deepest layer of the Founders' coding, the reason they built the Weavers, the reason they feared the entropy stalkers." Thorn looked at the display. It showed a map of the universe, not just the galaxy, but the web of galaxies. "The Founders didn't originate in this galaxy," Alara explained. "They came from Andromeda. They were refugees, the entropy stalkers. They aren't a natural phenomenon either. They are the immune system of the universe." Thorn frowned. "Immune system." "Civilization," Alara said, looking at the human ambassador with a mix of fear and reverence. "Technological civilization. It creates heat. It increases entropy. It accelerates the death of the universe. The stalkers are an automatic response. When a galaxy gets too loud, too advanced, the universe sends the white blood cells to clean it up, to reset the clock." The implications were staggering. The Great Silence wasn't just predators. It was the universe itself trying to survive. By advancing, by building empires, they were triggering the immune response. "So," Thorn said slowly, "if we win, if we defeat the stalkers, we kill the universe." "Or," Alara said, pointing to a specific data packet, "we evolve. The Founders were trying to find a way to transcend, to move to a state of existence that doesn't generate entropy. They failed. They panicked and built the Ark." She turned to Thorn. "But you, humans, you are different. You don't seek perfection, you seek efficiency, you seek survival. The simulation shows that there is a threshold, a way to punch through the immune response, not to hide from it, but to integrate with it." "How?" "We have to become the immune system," Alara said. "We have to stop fighting the universe and start engineering it. The humans, your recklessness, it's the key. You are the only species crazy enough to try to hotwire the cosmos." The story ended not with a parade, but with a new beginning. The war was far from over. The entropy stalkers were still coming, but now the goal wasn't just survival, it was ascension. The final scene took place on the bridge of a new ship. A ship built by human, Kylan, Xylot, and Hexarchy hands. It was a monstrosity of beauty, part organic, part crystal, part brutalist steel. Admiral Cole, now an old man, stood on the bridge. Beside him was Verk, preserved in a life support suit, serving as his advisor. They looked out at the Great Barrier at the edge of the galaxy. The darkness was waiting. "They are waiting for us to die," Verk rumbled. Cole smiled, the same dangerous, stubborn smile he had worn when he first faced the Synod. "Let them wait," he said. "We're not done making noise yet." He placed his hand on the throttle. "All hands," Cole said, his voice broadcast to 1,000,000,000 worlds. "Prepare for the next stage. We're going to break the cycle." The ship engaged its drive. It didn't tear space, it didn't fold it, it harmonized with it. The human fleet, a vast armada of the Defiant, surged forward into the dark, not as conquerors, but as the architects of a new eternity. The galaxy behind them was no longer silent. It was singing, a chaotic, discordant, beautiful song of life that refused to be filtered. And in the center of the chorus was the human note, a low, steady drumbeat of resolve that resonated through the void. When no other species answered, humans came, and they did not just bring aid, they brought the future. The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of a heartbeat, slow and strong, echoing in the infinite dark. End of narrative. This story attempts to capture the requested scale, tone, and specific HFY beats within the constraints provided, focusing on the cinematic atmosphere and the slow build structure.